What I would consider one of the OG bullet hell games, Cave's classic shooter finds its way onto the Switch. In this speed pass, it's Particle Mayhem in Mushihimesama. I remember seeing videos of this game, well, technically videos of its sequel, back in the early YouTube days, with clickbaity titles like Hardest Video Game Ever! The mesmerizing and intimidating patterns of bullets with an intense soundtrack are part and parcel for Cave nowadays, but this is the game where I saw it all first. It's nice to finally get a chance to play it myself. Despite its age, some of which kinda shows, Mushihimesama has a lot of talent on display. Mostly heavily detailed sprites with tons of animations, and some of which will seem to be mapped to 3D models to add that smoothness. The entire aesthetic, when you get to see it through Sea of Purple Particles, is insect-based, which is obvious if you know what Mushihimesama translates to. Beside the barely visible anime girl riding on the back of the beetle that you control, the entire game takes place in a world of giant insects and plants, though I initially interpreted that to mean that every main character of the game was just very small. There is a story here for those that want it, but it does seem strangely more involved and lore-heavy than you would think for a game that boils down to dodge everything that's purple. That's kinda commonplace among Cave's titles as well. Those purple particles are most of what you'll be seeing, especially if you're playing on any higher difficulty modes. Cave is so well known for their intricate and mesmerizing bullet patterns that I can't help but think that the developers originally wanted to make screensavers and just wandered into the wrong programming studio. With such absurdly complex patterns and thousands of particles on the screen at a time, the game seems to struggle to handle it all, and slowdown is so common that I almost expect it to the point that it was planned. Bosses especially dump the equivalent of a fireworks grand finale on you on regular intervals, and if the game didn't chug to a bullet time crawl, dodging these patterns would be near physically impossible. Adding to your ability to dodge these swarms among the swarms is the fact that your hitbox is far smaller than your sprite. If you haven't been playing a scrolling shooter since Gradius, it might seem odd that your beetle can seemingly be peppered with shots and not go down. That's because the hitbox isn't your beetle, it is the much smaller character riding on its back. Specifically that glowing white circle if you're in focus mode. If that collides with any shots, you'll lose a life. Music is pretty interesting, a lot of heavy bass beat techno and rock tracks, but also a lot of airy orchestrations that'll seem fairly commonplace to fantasy games. The soundtrack also changes depending on the game type that you chose from the beginning, which is a pretty cool way to add variety to something that's so inherently repetitive and simplistic. There's also a surprising amount of voice acting in Japanese, and bosses tend to have conversations with each other. It's not subtitled, but it's a neat touch that adds a bit more life to the game. Navigating what ends up often becoming a blurry mess of projectiles is made a bit simpler by the small hitbox, potentially purposeful slowdown, and the fact that these deadly projectiles are not only bright purple, but layered over every other graphic so that they won't be buried in the absolute mess on screen, considering you also spray a screen-filling cluster of bullets. If you need a reprieve from the mayhem, you have bombs which are effective for clearing the screen of bullets and swarmers than they are damaging enemies, but they still somewhat work for both. It's what I tend to refer to as an oh shit button. Continues are infinite, as it's an arcade port, so if you want to see all the game that has to offer, you won't be locked out of an arbitrary limit on continues, like the Jamestown Plus approach of living in 1992 and only having your mom giving you $1 for the arcade. But, since this is one of the arcade genres where score is a big deal to some, know that that score is reset with every continue. Part and parcel for this kind of shooter, there are only a few stages, each capped off with a boss at the end. Despite this, the multiple playstyles and difficulty modes make this a game that seems designed to be played through multiple times, especially when you're aiming for high scores. The play modes available are Novice, Normal, Arrange, and 1.5. Arrange is the most different of the four, in playstyle at least, while the rest are similar in offering up difficulty options within them, and they just seem to adjust bullet patterns. Can you tell I really couldn't find a concise explanation of these mode differences? It's not really the kind of game you'd play for the story, but fans of bullet hell shooters should probably appreciate one of the real classics, in the unlikely event they haven't heard of or played this game already. If you're not a fan of the genre, I can't imagine this will be the title to bring you around, but in the confines of the genre, it's an easy go recommendation. It's not overly complex as some bullet hell shooters can tend to be, like having multiple colors of shot types to avoid, or counterintuitive score multiplier tactics. All you gotta do is avoid the purple shots and fire away. It's a classic for a reason.